Hi, all. We'll give it another minute for folks to join us, and then we'll get going shortly.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Greg Kylo. I'm president of CNU Central Texas, and I want to welcome you back, or welcome you if you were not here with us this morning. We had two fantastic panels this morning. So if you're not able to make it, then everything is being recorded, and you can go back and look at it at your leisure. If you didn't come this morning, I really urge you to stick around for the 2 afternoon panels after the keynote. They're going to be fantastic as well. Our keynote speaker today is among the most important figures in urbanism for the past half century. We're so thrilled to have him virtually with us today. He was a personal inspiration to me early in my career, so I consider it a great honor to virtually welcome him to Austin and introduce him. It is such a great honor, we felt it appropriate that he be welcomed by the highest office in Austin. Mayor Steve Adler is the 52nd mayor of the city of Austin, having first been elected in 2014 as the first mayor to lead the city under the newly reorganized 10-1 district council system. In 2018, he was reelected by a comfortable majority despite running against a crowded field of opponents. Mayor Adler has led the city through some of the most challenging and rewarding of circumstances in Austin's history. Mayor Adler, thank you for agreeing to welcome our special guest today.
Well, great, and thank you so much. It's an honor to be part of the virtual version of the Congress for New Urbanism's annual luncheon. I want to welcome everybody virtually to Austin in this moment, and just real excited that today's speaker, one of the world's leading thinkers, researchers, teachers, authors, and practitioners of human-centered, sustainable urbanism. It is at the center of so much of the change that's happening right now in Austin. We're no longer the sleepy college town that we were when I arrived in Austin a little over 40 years ago. It's a city that's been doubling in population every 20 to 25 years, the fastest growing large metropolitan area in the country. We had for each of the last 8 years. What's amazing about this city is that's the same rate of growth that we've had since the 1860s. This is a city that recognizes and values the importance of urban planning on the quality of life and who a city is culturally and by personality. Real excited that this past November we passed Propositions A and B in taxpayer votes in the middle of a pandemic, because these help us get closer to serving the needs of our residents. It means that finally we're going to be able to have a transit system that reflects our status as the 7th largest city in the country. Proposition A authorized funding to build and operate Project Connect, an over $7 billion project that Austin has tried to do something similar repeated times over the last 20 years. And this was the year that we got it done. 3 new rail lines, tunneling and stations underground downtown, expanded and electrified bus service, 4 new rapid bus lines, electric bike share, technology upgrades. Importantly, $300 million just for anti-displacement investments, including affordable, transit-oriented development. A huge a huge investment in recognizing that not only there are the benefits that come from new projects, new enhancements, but that there are oftentimes associated challenges. And we're intending to meet those head on very early as part of the process to program in equity in what we're doing. Proposition B, almost $500 million for alternate transportation, including projects providing access to the Project Connect investments, but building out the Austin bicycle network 10 years earlier than was going to happen otherwise. Real importantly, these two projects, I think, show what a community will do if presented with exciting, transformative, and generational change in the face and functioning of a city. We were faced with the difficult choice back in May, mid-pandemic, about whether we should pull down this election because it was a tax rate election. You're going to the community and asking them for a sizable tax increase. Could we actually do that in the middle of a pandemic? And I think the lesson to be learned is that communities will extend themselves if the vision is exciting enough. We're excited that we're going to be reconstructing the main highway through the center of our city, finally knitting back together the east and west parts of our city. We're excited that we're going to be able to finally get that project done as we lower an interstate highway. We still have work to do with our land development code to realize the vision of the future. But we are working together to transform Austin into that 21st century city so that we can live the kinds of ideas and innovations that our speaker, Gehl, has written about and urged for such a long time. Jan is an architect, founding partner of Gehl Architects, professor emeritus of urban design, the Royal Danish Academy of Fine Arts School of Architecture. Over his career, published several books, including Life Between Buildings, Cities for People, New City Spaces, Public Spaces, Public Life, New City Life, and then most recently, How to Study Public Life. As part of Gehl Architects, Jan Gehl has collaborated on projects for the cities of Copenhagen and London and Melbourne and Sydney, New York and Moscow, among others. He's an honorary fellow of the Architectural Institutes in Denmark, England, Scotland, Ireland, USA, and Canada. He's been awarded the Sir Patrick Abercrombie Prize for exemplary contributions to town planning by the International Union of Architects, as well as receiving honorary degrees from universities of Edinburgh, Varna, Halifax, and Toronto. It's just really exciting to have this opportunity to hear him speak. Please join me in virtually welcoming Jan Gehl to Austin. We hope that you'll have the opportunity to visit us in person in the near future and share with us suggestions and what you see about our little town. Professor Gehl, thank you so much for participating.
Is it my turn now?
It is. Go ahead. You can share your slides and start.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you for the very kind welcome, and congratulations with having passed those impressive projects which are now going to be introduced in the years to come. I look much forward to hear more about these projects because to me it really signalizes an important step forward in making Austin much more livable. I will now share the screen and we can start with the slides. Does this work? Do you see the slides?
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Okay.
So here we are, here we go. I'm going to speak about livable cities for the 21st century, and I'll do a broad tour of the world also in this context. And I brought together tonight, or today, it's over there where you are, special because the mayor is here. I put emphasis on political solutions and good city ideas, which can just be picked up from here and there and reused in Texas without anybody noticing. So here we go. There's much talk these days about all the fantastic, wonderful new technical developments which will solve all problems in urban planning forever, and they will make cities livable forever. We, of course, are waiting for the autonomous cars, and we are told that they will solve all the problems we ever had. Looking at this picture which Ford has put together about the future of our cities, I'm not so sure that all the problems will be solved. It looks quite awful in my eyes, but if we can't solve them with automatic cars, of course, we can have the air completely filled with drones and helicopters, and that will solve the rest of them. Again, I'm not too convinced in what I see here, but maybe it could be a possibility. And also we are told that increasingly we will have smart cities which will do everything for us, as you can see here in this picture. My take on this is that it's all developing and it's all some gimmicks, and they're all very expensive, and they will have to be vast investments, and will take quite a while before they are unrolled in the developed world, and even more and more years before they reach out to the end of the other parts of the world. So I may ask, while we are waiting for all these fantastic things, are there other meaningful things we can do, should do? Yeah, I think that we could make cities for people our first priority. And what is the background for this? That is that in the past 50 years, we've done whatever we could think of to chase the people out of the cities. And I'll tell you a little bit about this 50 years we've just had behind us. In the middle of the 20th century, we started to see two very dominating planning paradigms unfolding. One was the modernism, that you now have to rely on various functions, and you live here, you work here, you recreate here, and you do your communication here. And the the other thing was a car invasion, and both of these two paradigms, they really started to be rolled out in the big way from around 1960. If we look further back before this, in the old cities, before modernism, we always made the cities of spaces. These spaces were where the people's life was going on. That was where you promenade, where you met your friends, where you had the market, where you beheaded kings and where you crowned kings, and where processions were going on. Everything happened in spaces. With the modernism, it was completely turned around. It was the biggest revolution or earthquake in the history of human settlements, because suddenly, instead of the spaces, there were now emphasis on the objects. It was the buildings which were important, and whatever was not built upon, that was leftover space. If we look at the old cities, we always can remember many streets and squares and parks, and only a few very important buildings like the cathedral, the town hall, the courthouse, the king's palace, and so on. If we look at old maps of the city like this one, famous one from 1748 by Nolli from Rome, you can see that his concept of a city was only a number of a very, very complicated system of spaces where the life of the city could go on. If we look at the modern cities, all we remember are endless number of funny buildings, and actually you can recall no spaces from the new towns, new cities, because spaces were something which was completely overlooked and redundant by now. Now it was all for the buildings. And of course, those who were most happy about this was indeed the architects who now were set free to do a number of very fascinating shapes. Also, we had now cities which you could buy via the internet and have them delivered by airplane. You could always get some towers, and sometimes I jokingly refer to the bird shit architects who go anywhere and dump towers out of context wherever they are asked for. But the result of all this movement in the modernistic movement and this shift from spaces to objects was really a goodbye for concern for people. People have always been in the center of human habitation. Now suddenly they were to use the leftover areas. Another thing about this transition from spaces to objects were that we completely forgot about human scale. Actually, the architects generally got enormously confused. Suddenly we could make big buildings and big spaces, and we did. And the whole idea of handling scale for people was more or less lost. Everybody was enormously confused. In the very same period, we saw the car invasion, and the cars took over the city spaces worldwide. And the people who had in the modernism, they were just treated badly. Now they were almost chased out of the cities and given very awful conditions. And that is all over the world, but of course, even worse in the developing countries. Another thing which happened with the automobile invasion was another blow to the knowledge of handling scale. In the old days, we had human scale. We had 5 km/h scale. It was made for walking, and for our senses are made for walking. 5 km/h. Spaces are small. We don't need them big in slow movements. We can see all the details. We can see the people, and we can see everything close by. And we can also see the best of the world. We can see both the things close and the mountains at the end of the street. With the automobile coming in, we started to have everything made in 60 km/h scale. That means in a scale which meant that if you drove 60 kilometers, it could be a little bit meaningful. The spaces now had to be big. If you move fast, you need big spaces. The signs had to be enormous, because you couldn't read signs in that speed if they were not enormous. You could not see people, and there were no details in the buildings because you couldn't enjoy them anyway in that speed. 60 km/h speed. That is the American burger strip, and that's many suburban areas all over the world now made in 60 km/h scale, while all the old cities were made in 5 km/h scale. All this was happening and has been happening for the last 50 years, but really took off around 1960. And I could put the question, what actually was known about physical form, about cities in relation to quality for people, to the life of people? By 1960, the answer was that virtually nothing was known. But shortly after all this really took off, we heard a very strong voice coming out from in New York. That was Jane Jacobs, living in Greenwich Village. She was an architectural journalist, and she was in great opposition to Robert Moses, who wanted to make Manhattan much, much better by tearing down all the redundant old areas like Tribeca and Soho and Greenwich Village and Little Italy and Chinatown, and put freeways across Manhattan and put high-rise alongside the freeways. That would be a way to save New York and have a much better New York. Unfortunately, Jane Jacob lived in one of the houses which were declared redundant, and she took up the fight with the city planners, Robert Moses especially, and they won, actually. They won that battle. And she wrote down this book, that This and Life of Great American Cities, saying many things, but foremost, if the motorists and the modernists are to form the cities, it will be the end of the great American cities, and we will have this instead of life in the cities. That was 1962. She's really become the godmother of humanistic city planning. She raised the whole question of where does people fit into this, and how can we make cities good for people? And she's really now a guru, a sort of goddess of urban planning. I saw this poster on a lamppost in Toronto a couple of years ago, and you can see that Jesus is supposed to look after the end of times, while Jane Jacobs, for sure, is looking after the future. She is still very much alive, though she, of course, fortunately, has passed away. Her thinking is very much alive. My own story is part of this whole picture. I graduated in exactly 1960, and what did we do in School of Architecture in the 50s? We were trained to be good modernists. We were hanging over models, moving objects around. We were putting functions to one side and to the other side, never mix functions, always separate people and functions. And really, a good city is something which would look good from the airplane or look good from the freeway. Not any questions was asked about whether it was a better place to live than anywhere else. It was just something we learned. We also bent 2 times a day towards Brasilia, the brand new functionalistic capital of Brazil. And we thought that was heaven on earth. Imagine how wonderful. I raced out of School of Architecture to do all these wonderful things which I just heard about. And and then I married a psychologist. And then suddenly we had other types of conversations in the house. The young architects and the young psychologists we met, and all the time heated discussions, and all the time it ended by the psychologists and sociologists saying, why are you architects not really interested in people? Why don't they teach you anything about people in School of Architecture? Have you thought why it is that your professors go out at 4 o'clock in the morning to photograph the monuments to be sure there are no disturbing people in the foreground of the pictures in the lectures? All this was, of course, something we haven't thought much about. So in my case, being a young and interested guy, I thought I better go back to architecture to hear what I missed first time. So I went back to School of Architecture to study 40 more years and to hear about people and what they didn't tell me about first time. Only to realize that when I heard nothing in 1950s and 60s, it was because absolutely nothing was known. We had to start really from square one in trying to make the people who used our architecture and our cities visible and see how they were using the places so that we could start to form the places for the people instead of having people being formed after whatever we built to them. In my particular case, I just sat there actually watching for 40 years That was a method mostly I used for my studies. That was just observing and systematizing the observations, counting and measuring people and putting it together and trying to find the patterns. And then you could start to find out how you could do it in another way and to do a better fit to the people. All was unknown when we started. Gradually, we put together some knowledge. Here's two little examples of little studies. We did studies for 40 years in 7 continents all over the world, all climates, all cultures, and in all times of day and night and year and snow and sunshine and heat and rain, whatever. But here's some little examples. Here is a little visit to the School of Architecture in Copenhagen. We moved the school from the inner city to an army barracks in the harbor front. And the dean called in a landscape architect who did some wonderful landscaping with lawns, with iron edges as they are supposed to be nowadays. In the foreground, you see the corner. And what happened at the corner? The students come around the corner. And then what's happening in the background? That's the canteen where you can have coffee. What happens when students see where they can have coffee? They go for the coffee. I think the landscape architects thought they should do a number of right-angled walks down there until they got the coffee. That's not what students do or people do generally. They go for the coffee because man is a very energy conscious animal. If it's his own energy, he will save as much he can. He go for the coffee. 2 weeks later, the landscape architect had to come back to finish his project in accordance with people's wishes or behavior. Another example of these studies were studying where would people stay in various spaces, in streets and squares and parks, and they would definitely like to stay by the edge if they had to wait for some time or be there for some time. This is St. Peter's Square, the other square is from Barcelona. It's all over the world. We found that people, they quietly ventured out to the edge. We can also see it in ballrooms where we have wallflowers who are sitting by the edge, waiting for the action to take place in the middle. When there's a break, they go out to the edge. And why the edge? Because all our senses are out front. And when we sit at the edge, we can see everything and nobody can sneak up from behind and say hello, whatever. So we are really comfortable and in control of the situation over by the edge. So we found all over the world that people love to stay at the edge. That's a good place to stay. Then we started to think about, will architects be different from ordinary people? And we started to do behavior studies in architecture schools in various countries. And we found amazingly that architects behave exactly like other people. They love to stay out by the edge. And then, of course, we can start to put questions like this. If architects are just like ordinary people, who on earth designed this? And who did they expect to come and sit in places like this? And we don't know about this, who did this? But I can give you a guarantee that they will never be used voluntarily unless you are very, very tired, because there's against all the rules we know about. Who did it? We don't know. Here we know it's the Libeskind who did this in Toronto, same sort of stuff. If you do this kind of stuff, I recommend you bring in some broad people, because then you're sure that somebody will be able to enjoy your sitting places. Nobody else is likely to do it. That's some of the studies we have done. After we started to systematize all this, we started to put it together. And my little thesis, Life Between Buildings, which came out after for 5 years of studies, started to be, it's 50 years now since it came out, but that was the first systematic explanation about how people use spaces and cities. And to my great joy, I saw it being picked up and gradually was distributed around the world. 40 years later, I was asked by a foundation who supported our studies if I would sit down and put down everything I knew after 40 years of study in one book before, while I could still remember it. So I sat down again and wrote a new book, but now 40 years later, which have a lot of more information, a lot of more advice for cities. And much to my joy, I've seen it being distributed in less than 10 years to languages and languages and countries all over the world. It's not because it's an extremely good book, but it shows very clearly that this people stuff is something which is really sorely needed. Everybody has been looking for information about how to do it, and that could explain why it's distributed so widely. Next one will be in Myanmar in December. And just yesterday, I got the new Turkish version, which is also coming out in December this year as number 37, I think it is. I'm very proud that all my books are now published in China. They have published out there in great numbers for actually 25 years. And they are all over. I know it because I've been asked to sign the majority of them, and I still have a sore hand about all this signing. So that's great, fantastic. What I'm a little bit worried about is that it seems that they have had no time to read the books out there yet, but sometimes some signs are there that they've started to use this kind of humanistic approach also in rapid growing China. If I should sum up all this, after 50 years of research, starting with Jane Jacobs in 1961, we now have a pretty good knowledge about how to make fine cities which people will love, where people will love to be, to stay, to walk, to stroll around, to sit and enjoy. We know it. The matter is very much to apply it, to get it spread out to architects and politicians worldwide, so we can start to use it in the big way. To sum up, what we found out in these studies was very much that we have an enormous influence. The physical environment, the way we build the cities and buildings, they have an enormous influence on the way we can live, the quality of life. We would say that first we form the cities, but then for sure the cities form us. So we better know about how we manipulate, because we do manipulate. Then I could go on and tell you in more detail how to do and what we know, but maybe I could just refer to my books, of which there are, one, two, three, but actually 7 books in English for you to pick up in your library. You can read it all there, and we found out a lot. Now, 50 years later, we can see that we have other things on our minds when we do city planning. Today, what is wanted, I'm sure that the mayor of Austin has the same program, that he wants a lively and livable city. He wants a sustainable city. He wants the city to be healthy, and he realizes that he needs a city which is good to be old in. This livable and lively thing is maybe the most important of all of them. That is the age-old fact that we as human beings, we are very social animal. The public spaces, the shared spaces where we could meet our neighbors, our schoolmates, our fellow citizens, our fellow citizens in the city of Austin or whatever, where we can see how life is going on, how people are dressed, and see the little street ballet going on all the time, as Jane Jacob wrote about it. So we know that people is the #1 attraction in the city. It's much more attractive than the buildings and the architecture and the car makes and whatever. The #1 attraction for all of us throughout our lives are the people. That was chased away with modernism and motorism. If you have to have an idea about how much we love lively cities, just look at any architect drawings being handed in. You can see that it's crawling with happy people, because happy people is a sign it must be a good project. So everybody, they just overflow their drawings with happy people so that it looks as if it's a pretty good project. It may be, or it may not be, doesn't matter. They get it. They get people washed, all the drawings. Also today, increasingly, we realize that there is a climate crisis, that we influence the climate, and we have to make, especially in the cities which are major culprits, we have to make the cities much more sustainable. And there's a number of ways we can do it, but of course, if we can walk and bicycle more, the more we do this, the better for the climate. And also, when gradually we are to develop new modes of transportation, as you are in Austin also, you realize that it's very important to have a good public realm, because that's the other half of having a good public transportation system. You should be able to move to your stations and your bus stops and train stops in comfort and safety at all times of the day and night. Then we've got a new challenge, and that's from the doctors who come and tell us that we now have a serious new syndrome, the sitting syndrome. People sit far too much, so it's essentially that we make our cities so that we move more and sit less. This would actually give us 7 more years of life expectancy and giving us a much better life during the end of our lives, much better quality of life. It will be much, much more cheap for the society the more we move. So they say everybody ought to move 1 hour every day. That will result in you living much longer and having much better quality of life. And it is a serious, this sitting syndrome is very serious in a number of countries. I picked up this map from United States, and I see that Texas is not so bad as Louisiana, which is good. And of course, I can say don't worry, because obesity is even more widespread in Saudi Arabia, but it is a major challenge. And we can see World Health Organization saying to all of us, introduce transport policy that promote you being active and safe methods of traveling, walking and bicycling. Also in our cities, we realize we have an increasing number of elderly people who may have 10, 20, 30 years of where they are active and between the workforce and until the end of the days. And they need to have a nice city to live in, but so does the children, and actually so does all of us. I know that being an elderly person, the doctors would say to us, all of us, that 1,000 steps a day will keep the doctor away. So we have to be out there moving, and where can we move and how can we move? And is it wonderful to move yourself? Is you invited to do it? Summing up this, if we look carefully after people in city planning, we realize that we will efficiently address all the issues I mentioned. We will have more livable and lively cities. We will have more sustainable cities. We'll have more healthy cities. and we'll help better cities to be old in and young in. Then I can ask the question, are there cities where everything is done to invite people to walk and to bicycle as much as possible during the daily day doings, not only on Sunday and Saturdays, but actually also on the Mondays and Tuesdays? And the conclusion is that cities in all corners of the world are doing this by now. I just heard these new decisions or the vote coming out in Austin, and I could very much hear an agenda which might look in some ways of more transportation, more public transport, and better conditions for walking and bicycling. I'll give you some examples of the cities where I have worked in the last 2-3 decades. I could invite you to Melbourne. I could tell you enormous much about Melbourne. They've done fantastic work of revitalizing Melbourne. They've said in Melbourne, we have streets, we walk in Melbourne. They have put limits on the car driving, and they have widened all the sidewalks and put granite on them. And Melbourne now is much like Paris. It's just that the weather in Melbourne is better than in Paris, but the quality of the streets and boulevards is very like. Melbourne is constantly voted one of the most livable cities in the world, and it is by far the best city in the Southern Hemisphere. If you don't know what to do, go to Melbourne, actually. That's my advice. Do they do bicycle lanes? Of course, that's part of their policy also. And they call them Copenhagen-style bicycle lanes. And what's Copenhagen-style? That is when the parked cars are protecting the bicycles, instead of in other places you can see that the bicycles are presumed to protect the parked cars. Not so in Melbourne. They have other things which are interesting in Melbourne. They have the whole inner city. They have free public transportation with their tram system, an old system which they have renewed and expanded and still use intensively as a backbone of their public transportation, and it's free. And also good advice for mayors. Melbourne is one of the few cities I know of in the world who have a good plan for what to do with the suburbs. I heard that Austin was expanding fast, so is Melbourne. They have to make room for another 3 million people, and the city architect have made a plan where by building out along the transport corridors with 7-story high buildings, you can actually, inside the existing city area, house double the area, double the number of inhabitants in Melbourne. And in this way, by taking 13% of the single family houses away, you can have all the other people, 87% of the suburbanites, they could have close access, walking distance to public transportation, to services, to doctors, to shops, to the whole hula boo. So you could certainly make the suburbs come alive and still accommodate twice as many people and have much more emphasis on public transportation. They call it the Barcelona plan because in Barcelona, the houses are 7 stories high. And that is exactly a height where you can still follow what's happening in the city. And so these people are part of the city. And it's specifically mentioned there should be no high-rise and skyscrapers along these corridors. 7 stories will do, linear Barcelona. That is one of the best suburban plans I've seen around the world. I could tell you about New York, but of course we haven't got time, but I could mention that Michael Bloomberg, he in 2007 made this plan for New York, where he said, I'll make New York the most sustainable city metropole in the world. And he said, we will bicycle here, we will walk here, we'll use the metro, and I will try to push the commuting cars out of the city. That was a long story. We worked there quite a bit, and one of the results, as you may know, was he was able to close Broadway to through traffic so that we could have public spaces developed in all the important squares along Broadway, Gehl Square, Union Square, Madison Square, and of course, Times Square. Overnight, it turned from a traffic inferno to a nice public space. At least that's what it looked like in the beginning. I was there recently and found that so many commercial enterprises have been allowed in that you now could hardly move around for coffee shops and burger stands and whatever. So some of the serene beauty here had gone by now. That can be cleaned up. I could invite you to the city of Sydney, and I'll do that in more detail. And I'll introduce you to the mayor, Clover Moore, in Sydney, who is a very interesting mayor. And I mention all this about mayors because we have a mayor in the audience today. Sydney is famous for its very good waterfront, very fine waterfront, but it was infamous for that the city center is completely overrun by motor cars and buses. In the narrow streets, there's an enormous congestion, there are noise, fumes, everything. The mayor started out right away saying that we must have a city which is much more green. We must have a city which is much more friendly. We cannot accept that our city center is completely overrun by motor cars. And we have worked for quite a while now, and it's not been easy because the state of New South Wales have in many ways obstructed any improvements the mayor of Sydney wanted to do. Rumor has it that everybody in the state government, the premier in the state government, was very worried that the mayor of Sydney should be too popular and could be the prime minister of the whole state. But anyway, Clover Moore struggled, and now 2019 they were able to close parts of the city and introduce the new light rail which should go out through the street of the city. It will be the new type of light rail which have no lines in the air but are fed from the ground. Also in Sydney, of course, there is a widespread bicycle system coming up. And what is interesting about City, and I took this along as a good idea because I really think it's excellent, that is, they have a plan that in 2030, we will be a green city and we'll be it in this way. And every time they build everything, they put up lots of posters and banners to tell what they are doing and why they are doing it. Here, they have introduced bicycle lanes, and they are doing a lot to say it's not to harass you who wants to park there but can't park anymore. But we are doing it for the world. We are doing it for mankind. We are doing it to make our city sustainable. And furthermore, she writes about many times that you voted for this. And that is what is fact here. Mayor Clover Moore, she has put out this agenda of being people-friendly and green. And she has won 3 elections in a row with increasing popular support. So she has this platform and she's become tremendously popular, and she's very good both in making projects, but especially in making explanations about what we do and why we do it. Every time they dig anything, they have these posters. The whole city can be seen as a very green city, and certainly they're good in making posters, they're good in informing people about what they are doing and what they're doing it for. That has proved to be a very good policy. I could invite you to Moscow. Moscow was a city. I went to a conference, spoke about the other cities, and the vice mayor from Moscow came galloping up and said, we want to humanize Moscow. It's very urgent. You must come at once. We went there at once, and we were completely shocked by seeing that in this city, they had allowed the cars to run absolutely wild. They have not yet introduced parking systems, no parking spaces, no parking fees or parking police. Everybody parked where they could find a place, in the parks, on the sidewalks, everywhere. We were hired to make a study of the life in Moscow. That was very easy done because the people were almost chased away by all this traffic. And we were asked to make a plan for how to win back, how to reconquer Moscow for the people in Moscow. And then started a process of very amazing improvements. This is Main Street, Moscow. In 2011, it was full of parked cars, and all the people in Moscow just had 1 meter to walk. Now the parking cars was gone, and now you have trees, and benches all the way. The gray street is beginning to be green, and all the advertisements in the air has come down, and you can see now Kremlin in the distance. It's starting to be a nice city. Here's a side street, very poor conditions for the people. Now it's given to the people and full of people. Here's a little square near Pushkin Monument. Over the years, it's become full of funny things which have drifted in. Now it's cleaned up, got a good paving. You can see the metro station. The trees have come in. All the lines in the air have come down and put underground. It's a completely new city. When I was last in Moscow, I was approached by some of the people saying, "Hey, Jan, you have created a new problem here in Moscow. We have now a serious baby boom by putting up all these benches and taking the cars off the sidewalks and putting up swings in the squares so that people can have a good time while they're enjoying the public space." And they said, "We have good reasons to believe that we can blame all this on the humanistic city planning." Mind you, I'm very proud if I, through humanistic city planning, can create baby booms. I think that's a very wonderful perspective. Also in Moscow, I had the chance to meet Corbusier. He's sitting there in Bronx. And so finally, I had a chance to talk with him about modernism and what actually were good about it and actually what went wrong. It was a very one-sided discussion. Finally, I'll take you to my home city of Copenhagen, which is famous because it's one of the first pioneers to unroll a people-first policy, and they've done it now for almost 60 years. It all started in 1962 when the first street, the main street, was cleared of traffic and made into pedestrian. Everybody thought it would never work in Denmark. We were Danes, we were not Italians. And furthermore, it was too cold and there was no tradition for using the city. It will be a flop if you took the cars away. So they took the cars away, and the next moment we started to be Italians. And we have become more Italians for every year. That was such a success that they started a long process of doing things for people every year now for almost 60 years. And to realize how many years ago this was done, then I could say that it was just the same time as Jane Jacob was sitting over writing about it in New York. They did it in Copenhagen. Copenhagen looked like every other city in the world at that point. All the squares and streets were full of parked cars. All of them in the city center, the squares, they're all cleared of parking and given over to people spaces. All the wonderful waterfronts were used for parking or driving. Now they are cleared of parking, and many of them are now given to people activities. In newer public spaces are not only in the city center, but all over the city, and more emphasis on being active, doing things like here, swimming in the harbor. What is special about Copenhagen, that Copenhagen was the first city in the world where actually the life in the city were documented. It was the university, our team in the university, who pioneered the study of people by using Copenhagen as a laboratory. And we have done a number of these big studies so that we know everything about people and the public life in Copenhagen. And we know just as much about people as the traffic engineers know about transport. And as you know, we have this saying that what you count, you care for. In Copenhagen, very early on, we were able to count and show what the public life was about, where the problems were, where the opportunities were. And that started to have and has increasingly had a stronger and stronger effect on the policy of the city. So the city and university have worked closely together. And now this whole studying of public life has been taken over by the city. And they, of course, have a department for public life, as well as they have a department for transport in the city, for traffic in the city. Copenhagen, 1962, the inner city, one street cleared of cars. Copenhagen now is completely dominated, or it's very, very many spaces are laid out for people and people activities. And also at the same time, it's more and more complicated to go through the city in a car, and to find a parking space is also becoming more and more complicated. Again, what is characteristic of Copenhagen is that they have very early on started to have visions. Where will this city be 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now? And then they have made out strategies. What shall we do first? Where shall we start? Where shall we be 5 years? So on. They had this strategy from 2009 saying we will be the best city in the world for people. And in the strategy, they are outlining how to get there and where they should be in 15, in 2020, in 2025. And actually, they are ahead of their own predictions. Examples of this people first policy, which is now influencing all the planning in Copenhagen, is this about the normal streets. They used to be like the upper street, just asphalt from wall to wall. But now all of them have been reshaped, remodeled. There are 2 lanes of traffic, one either way. There are street trees, there are bicycle lanes, there are sidewalks, and there are good median in the middle of the street for resting when you cross and for looking out. And this lower street is much more beautiful, it's much more safe. And lo and behold, it can take the same number of cars as could the upper street, because the transport engineers have become much more clever in the time since 1980s. Another item of the Copenhagen plan is that you have continuous sidewalks and bike lanes. So instead of stopping the bike lanes and the sidewalks whenever you have a little side streets, they just let them continue. And that's of course wonderful to have an uninterrupted walk or travel with your wheelchair. But also it's wonderful because now my grandchild, Laura, 7, she can now walk to school because she can stay on the sidewalk all the way to school. Cycling in Copenhagen has also been prioritized. We have now a complete bicycle lane network on all the streets all over the city, and they are good, proper bike lanes with a curb to the traffic and a curb to the sidewalk, and it's for all generations. Of course, having such a network has led to that we have a complete alternative transportation system to the cars. We can transport everything on bicycles. Every 3rd family has a cargo bike in Copenhagen to transport the kids. The crucial point in bicycle systems are the street crossings. That's where people get hurt. They have worked quite energetically to solve these problems, and now it's pretty safe to bicycle in Copenhagen. And I know that my grandchildren, when they are 12 years of age, they are allowed to go on bicycle all over the city to their sports and their friends and whatever activities, because it's considered safe when you are 12. To have a good alternative transportation system, you must integrate the bicycle system with the public transportation system. So it is in Copenhagen. You can take the bicycles in the city trains for free. Very popular. Also, they have put in a number of shortcuts everywhere. They have the policy that it should always be quicker and more convenient to take your bicycle between 2 points in the city than to take the car. So it's easier and it's cheaper. It's better for the health and it's better for the climate and better for the pollution. Take the cars and also take the bike. It's much cheaper. Actually, when a person in Copenhagen go 1 kilometer on a bike, society earns $1. If the same guy jumps into his car and do the same kilometer, society loses 25 cents. So they found it's a very good investment to invest in bicycles because there's good society earnings involved here. Sorry. Yeah, the most recent bridge, that's actually Jan's Bridge. And why is it Jan's Bridge? It's not called Jan's Bridge. They've not come around to do that. But I talked the foundation for the built environment in Denmark into to pay for a bridge. And that's another thing which I heard there was interest about in Austin, that the pedestrian and footbridges we have thrown across our river or the harbor, several of them are paid for by foundations and other forms of donations from citizens. Also, of course, they have a strategy about bicycles. They will be the best city in the world for bicycles, and they know where to head and where they should be 5-10 years from now. If we put all this together, we can see that an impressive culture of using bicycle has gradually evolved. In 2018, 49% of everybody commuting to work or studies in Copenhagen were arriving on their bikes. 10 years ago, it was 38%. And to sum up, what have we learned? Yeah, we have known all the time that if you invited more traffic by making more streets and roads, you will get more traffic. But now we know that if you make good invitations for people, you will have much more walking, much more public life, much more bicycling. And actually, you will have a much more livable and wonderful city to live in for all generations, and also to visit by people from the outside. This city planning in Copenhagen has become very popular around the world, where they are copying it. And actually, there are now 400 delegations from other cities a year in Copenhagen. Here we have the mayor of Sydney in Copenhagen to see what to do. And what else happens? Yeah, the ideas spread in society. Here, the Danish cultural minister is reading her favorite book, but better still, she's making a new Danish architecture policy. We must put people first in architecture. What else? Yeah, one of my closest associates, one of my students, PhD students, and later on associates in our company, is now the city architect. So here we have an expert in cities for people being trusted with being the architect for the city. What else could happen if you had such a policy of reducing the car parking and reducing the lanes and being sweet to people and put in bicycle lanes and all that stuff? Yes, you may end up having your portrait, having your posters on the bus stops all over the city, which is very fantastic in a country like Denmark, where we have a special law that you should never try to stick out from the other ones, but having your poster inside your lifetime on the bus stops in your city, that's as far as you can get in a country like Denmark. So in the end, I'll send to all of you in Austin my best wishes for making Austin a great livable city for people. I hear to my great joy that you are well on your way with these new elections, and I wish you all the best of luck. Get going, get cracking. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jan. Fantastic inspiration from around the world, but particularly your hometown and everything that you've contributed to make it a wonderful, sustainable place. And we can only aspire to such things in Austin, but we're doing our best, and we're gonna do our best. So looks like we've got 3 questions, and I'll just start in order, I guess. Let's see what your response is. The first is from Vidila. What would be your answer to dealing with the U.S. traffic engineer who's primarily focused on vehicle levels of service and accommodating growth projections?
I will quote Michael Bloomberg. He has been very active in the organization C40 of mayors from the 40 biggest cities who come together to discuss how to do something for the climate. He was in Copenhagen in October for the C40 meeting. And he started out his talk by saying, "In God we trust, but now bring me the data." And that's exactly what Bloomberg has done in New York, because all these transformations in New York, all of them, they started by getting the data, by finding out how the places were used, how badly the people were treated. And that was the background for being able to transform, say, Broadway the way he has. And he has made 50 other squares like this, all of them after bringing in the data about how the things really was used. So to your transport engineers, I'll just say, try to study the life in the cities just as carefully as you study the cars and the traffic, and you'll find interesting patterns.
Great. So the next one is from one of your biggest fans, Veronica Castro de Barrera, one of our board members who just spent some time with your firm. I celebrate this opportunity to thank you. Overwhelmed with gratitude that I find it extremely difficult to ask one single question. I want to know in your own words, how would you like to be remembered?
How would I like to be remembered? Yeah, I have no special wishes here. I think that I have actually made my footprint, and if I can make a baby boom in Moscow, what can you more ask for?
All right. Then we have an anonymous question. What are your ideas, examples of humanizing places that lack a historic urban form, like Austin? I mean, our original town plan, our original city plat has got some good bones, but anything beyond 1950 doesn't. And we're created for cars from the beginning. So everything outside of our downtown area pretty much was created for cars. Is there any hope for redeeming sprawl?
I think that it is interesting to study places like Melbourne and Sydney, who also was built the same way, where they've done a number of alterations and they humanized the cities in various ways. So definitely it can be done. And there are also other cities in America where they've done interesting work. But it is a problem with the scale. But the scale can be also reduced by planting, by tree rows, and there's a number of tricks in the books actually.
And then Adam Greenfield, another one of our board members, has asked, how do you engage with widespread public fears around widespread changes to the built environment, such as infill development and increased density? And I'm gonna add a little bit to Adam's question, because Adam is probably best known in Austin for advocating for pedestrianized areas like you have in Copenhagen starting in the 1960s, and it expanded greatly. And I think maybe, well, you said that in Denmark that people said, well, Danes aren't Italians and Texans aren't Danes. So what's your advice on how to engage with the widespread public fears around change?
Widespread public fears?
Mm-hmm.
Could you fear of each
people
other?
People who are fear change. I think it's sort of a human condition sometimes that we fear what
change.
we know, and we fear change.
Fear of change.
Yes.
Oh, that's an easy one. I think that I've worked in 300 cities, and in every single of them, I was told when we started, this could never happen here because we are different. Maybe most loud it was in New York, where they said you can never use European ideas in New York because we are the big apple. We are awake 24 hours a day. Everything is different here. It can never work here. And actually, these places work very, very efficiently and wonderfully. So I've seen in one city after the other that when they say we are special here, they're not special. They're Homo sapiens. And the moment they're getting good opportunities for enjoying life and unfolding, they act like human beings everywhere. That's my experience from my work. And every time we have this discussion.
Looks like we just got a question in chat. What are your thoughts on creating truly protected infrastructure, not only for active modes, but also for low speed, low emission, low cost modes that are increasingly springing up in cities like e-bikes, scooters, Vespa style scooters, even golf carts? From Susan Engelking, Institute for Community Micromobility.
I should say that I have not so much experience. I'm not a traffic engineer, but I know that some of these things are now being accepted and integrated on the bicycle lanes, and other of these things are in the car lanes, or they are being discouraged by the city planners, saying that we are critical about this and this way of moving because it doesn't fit to the other ways we move. It's not a buffet where everything necessarily shall be eaten.
Okay, I think that's all the questions that I'm seeing. I'll ask one for myself, and I hope. Oh, here's another one. Most of the discussion thus far has been correcting problems in large cities. What specific recommendations do you have for professionals working in small, growing cities and communities?
During my long career, I have worked in all sizes of cities, from villages with a couple of hundred people to Moscow with 14 million. And my conclusion is that I found that there were Homo sapiens everywhere, and that some of the basic things which we have found out about Homo sapiens, they apply everywhere. Also, in spite of color of skin and of customs and of climate even, there are differences, but they will not be so much about the size of the cities as the climate, which can be very icy and cold, or very hot and humid and rainy, or hilly. Topography could also influence quite a bit. But some of the basics about how people behave and how they meet and how they interact with architecture, they're not very different from the small places to the big places.
Okay, so we have another question from Laura Toops, one of our past presidents. After experiencing the pandemic, do you have thoughts about how public spaces may change as a response to public fears?
We have one experience, that is that cities which are generally good for people have also been able to accommodate the lockdowns and the special COVID precautions better than cities which were not so well suited for human activities. And I think that, of course, many people now say, now we shall make anti-COVID cities. And we tried that with the tuberculosis. That was modernism, and that was a great error, actually. And we overdid it in every way. So this idea that we should skip human scale, make sidewalks 8 meters wide, and make lifts 6 meters by 6 meters, so we can keep distance forever after, and forget about human scale. That's not the way to go. We shall let the doctors sort this one out, and then we shall concentrate on what we as architects and planners can do. That will mostly be about society and social and relations between people. There we can do something which is meaningful.
Great.
We are not so good with bacteria and vira.
Yeah.
We architects.
Oh, they're rolling in. Okay, good. Jane Jacobs may be the goddess of urbanism, but in America, she's also the goddess of NIMBYism and hyperlocalism. Have you contended with NIMBYism in your work?
Not in my
Familiar with the
backyard.
term?
Yeah, not in my backyard.
Yeah, yeah.
I never picked her up as a NIMBYist, but maybe she was. Of course, there are many problems involved. Say one of them, which we have in Copenhagen now, is that because we made such a nice, wonderful city, everybody wants to come in and live in the central areas, and the prices are going up and up. And then we have this gentrification. And the best thing I can say is, let's not make a good city, let us make it so bad as we can, then the rich will go away. But that's not an answer. The answer, of course, is we shall make more places which are so attractive that people will want to be there. And also, I mean that much of this with gentrification is a political matter where you have to have political decisions about making affordable, a certain amount of affordable buildings in all districts, so that you have a mixture of population and don't get these areas where everybody is very rich or the opposite. They have something in Vienna and in Amsterdam. They have not much less gentrification because the cities own quite a bit of the housing and can decide on the rent politically. It's not the market, but the politicians who decide part of the rent structure, which can be a very important difference.
Mhm.
But of course, that is social democracy. They're probably social democrats
Right. Right.
or welfare society.
Right. A little bit of political differences between here and there.
I know that.
Yeah. But you know, in Austin, I mean, we did just pass a huge transit bond, Prop A, which includes $300 million for anti-displacement affordable housing initiatives. I don't know that means that the city will end up owning apartments. But you know, that we have a history. We have invested in previous bonds of investing in affordable housing. So I think there's a will there in the community to do everything we can. It's just really it's hard to keep up with the growth and the escalation of costs. They're kind of enormous here. So, but we're trying.
I deliberately brought along this example from Melbourne, where they have tried to figure out how could growth and improvement of the suburbs go together so that we could have an altogether better city, but still accommodating the newcomers.
Mhm.
And that's a very interesting idea, very interesting plan. And one of the few I know of in the world which have really been in such a way that you believe that it could be done. They have started to do it.
Yeah, we have a lot of endless debates about how much growth is realistic or not, even though, as the mayor said, we double in population every 20 to 25 years. It's when you're projecting in the future, everyone's doubts whether we're going to continue to grow. But next question we have, 60 kilometer per hour coarse-grained architecture still represents most new developments in many cities, including in Texas. I would say probably, especially in Texas. What's the best way to make fine-grained 5 kilometer per hour architecture the norm again?
I do think that it doesn't have to be the whole street. Champs-Élysées in Paris, they have a nice pedestrian space on the sidewalk on either side. And then they have 135,000 cars a day going down in the middle. So one can make local scaling down, like with trees and porticos, whatever. And you can still have a wide space and you can still have a number of cars. It's very important for me to say that I'm not against cars, I'm pro people. That means we shall make sure that we treat people properly. We shall make sure that the old people and the handicapped people and the mothers with prams and fathers can get around and the children can go to school, whatever. We shall make sure that this can be going on decently. And then, of course, we have to service also with some vehicular traffic. Of course, my point is that I think the concern for the vehicular traffic has taken over the other concerns. So we have been far more obsessed with mobility and have forgotten about quality of life for the inhabitants in the various neighborhoods.
So we have another question from Susan Engel-King. What are your thoughts on taking over vast wastelands of parking in Austin and repurposing them for people-oriented housing and parks?
So you were still talking about taking over great unbuilt areas or parking lots?
Yeah, that's her, yeah.
Yeah, of course it would be much nicer to have people living there. And if you need the cars, they could be underneath somehow, because nobody can say that it's wonderful to walk in a parking lot, or you don't feel safe, or you don't feel pampered in any way. It's just awful. So I think that it's much better if these sites could be used for building residences, or they can be converted into parks, maybe. And maybe one can combine it by having, which is very common, by having the park cars underneath some interesting use on the top.
Well, I think
Nearly all great European public spaces have a huge underground parking underneath, which pays for the square.
right.
That's a very common feature.
Right. I don't see any more questions, so I'm going to ask mine. I hope it isn't too trite, because I think you kind of perhaps said it in the presentation, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Maybe it'll help wrap it up. You've spent a lifetime most of my lifetime anyway. And
So far,
so far,
until now.
okay. Studying, thinking, teaching, writing, practicing about how to make cities better places. And you've had a tremendous impact, as you've noted, and you even have a poster on a bus stop in your hometown. That's awesome. What one thing would give you the most hope that we're finally starting to figure it out, and that your work has been recognized and is actually being put into effect?
I'm quite I'm quite confident, because I see, say, the modernism as a bubble, as a period of time, then comes another time. I see the invasion of the automobile as a time, as a period. We started 120 years ago and will end, and there will be some other things coming up. So I think that we always have seen different epochs. And I see actually all this about people as a return to the time before the modernists, and actually also before the motorists, saying that many values and qualities were lost in this process. And we can have a lot of good life and still have much more of these qualities in our cities, and still be mobile, and still have new buildings and houses, whatever. But we will have to respect more what reason we made the cities for, why we are living in cities, what are the benefits of living in cities. We came together to meet each other and together to develop the culture. Throughout history, these meeting of people have been the main purpose of city. And we have had some pressures from ideologies in architecture, from technological developments, which just by the market has been taken far too wide.
So you're full of hope.
I'm full of hope, yeah.
That's great to know. I want to thank you again so much for spending some time with us today. It means a lot to us, and as the mayor said, we do hope that you have an opportunity to come to Austin and real life in person, visit with us, and we can show you the things we've only talked about, and talk about all the great things we would like to do to make it an even better place. So,
and I can sign these books we talked about.
Yes. Great. So again, on behalf of the Board of Directors of Congress for the New Urbanism Central Texas, thank you so much for spending the time. And
You're most welcome.
yeah, and we hope to talk to you soon.
Goodbye.
Bye.